Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm very pleased to have joined here with us Michael Holder from AVITA Medical, Dr. Michelle Miller from Biotron, Dr. Paul Gavin from Avecho Biotech, and Gary Phillips from Pharmaxis. I'm Connor Daly from Peak Asset Management, and it's going to be a cracking webinar to talk all things biotech. I'd just like to also give a quick shout out and thank you to our partners at Monsoon for assisting us with putting this event together. So yeah, biotechnology, very topical at the moment. I think, the search to understand and find solutions for COVID-19 has really sort of enforced intense government, media and public attention, in particular on science and medicine. I think what we're seeing on our end is this has really sort of re-intensified and the perception in particular from investors who are viewing biotech acquisitions, capital raisings and partnerships as a fantastic opportunity to invest. What we've seen, and an incredible statistic I actually just read, was that at the end of July 2021, the total capital raised for biotech companies had actually surpassed 1.3 billion, which is just incredible here on the ASX. So today we're very lucky to have with us 4 emerging biotech companies, all are developing novel and wonderful treatments and medicines that, if proved effective, could really potentially assist and improve the lives of many around the world. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest, Michael Holder from AVITA Medical.
Thank you, Connor. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for hosting this webinar. So AVITA Medical is a regenerative medicine company that's developing and commercializing the RECELL technology platform that enables point-of-care autologous skin restoration for multiple unmet needs. Our stock trades on NASDAQ under the symbol RCEL and on the ASX under the trading symbol AVH. And moving on to slide 3, which focuses on our leadership team. We're very proud of the team that we built. We have in excess of 150 years of executive experience with leading medtech, biotech, cell and gene therapy, and healthcare companies in the States, in Europe, Australia, and otherwise. And these companies include Novartis, Allergan, J&J, Boston Scientific, and Smith & Nephew, and others. On slide 4, relative to our RECELL device and technology, when deployed, the way that it works is that healthy skin is removed from the patient, processed through our RECELL system, and autologous skin cells are then sprayed on a patient to accelerate their healing process. The RECELL device was awarded the first US FDA PMA approval in the burn space following a successful completion of a randomized clinical trial. And this is the first FDA PMA in over 20 years, which was awarded in September 2018 rather, and the device has now been commercialized in the US. The platform, however, is applicable to a lot more than burns. We currently have clinical trials going on in soft trauma, soft tissue and trauma, vitiligo, and there are many other indications as well, including those in cell and gene therapy applications. So on slide 5, we look at the very large serviceable market at our call points for the RECELL platforms. In thermal burns, that's in US dollars, $260 million, vitiligos, $750 million per year, and soft tissue trauma is $450 million, so that's a total annual serviceable market at our call point of 1.5 billion. We've treated more than 10,000 patients globally, and relative to our clinical studies, more than 2,000 patients have been included in clinical studies, and we have over 250 publications and presentations that support each of these indications. Relative to our pipeline, we feel like it's very, very strong and robust. So in addition to thermal burns, as I mentioned previously, we have an ongoing pivotal trial in vitiligo, a pivotal trial in soft tissue reconstruction. Relative to the burn market and other markets in Japan, we partnered with Cosmotech, who is seeking PMDA approval in Japan and reimbursement for our technology. We anticipate obtaining that by the end of this calendar year and commercializing early next year. Additionally, we have several promising early stage research programs, including work with Epidermolysis bullosa, as well as Rejuvenation. And then from a product development standpoint, we have completed work on an ease of use improvement to the device, which we have in front of the FDA for approval, and anticipate that in the first half of this next calendar year. And we also are working on a fully automated RECELL device, which we would look to get approval from the FDA and to launch concurrent with our vitiligo program. So we've been very pleased with the adoption of the RECELL system in the States. We've realized in excess of US $42 million to date since approval. We're very well positioned for additional penetration. We have over 85% of US burn surgeons who are certified, meaning they've gone through didactic training and other training, as well as they've completed at least one procedure with the device. In addition to that, we have 77% of US burn sites which have been activated, meaning the value analysis committees have approved the RECELL technology for adoption. And we have realized in excess of 4,000 procedures in the US today. On slide 8, while the current RECELL platform works with autologous healthy skin cells from donor patients, we have future applications that we're working on where we are taking damaged skin cells, processing them through the RECELL system, and then genetically modifying those cells so that we can create an enhanced autologous skin cell solution for various additional applications. So to that end, on slide 9, AVITA is exploring a cell-based gene therapy for Epidermolysis bullosa in partnership with the Gates Center of Regenerative Medicine in Colorado. For those of you who don't know, EB is a genetic skin disorder in which the epidermis does not connect properly to the dermis. There are no, in the States, there are no FDA-approved treatments, only palliative, and it's very expensive to treat at $300,000 to $500,000 per patient. So in this research with this program, a gene editing technology is being deployed for precise correction of this genetic effect and for cell banking of the corrected cells. So the RECELL technology is used to create a cell suspension which eliminates the necessity for growth and transport of skin sheets, which is the current standard of care for EB, and which suffer from fragility and require surgical anchoring, which is a very complex procedure. We're expecting proof of concept for delivering genetically modified cells in suspension in the fourth quarter of 2021. On slide 10, we are also exploring a novel RNA-based approach to skin rejuvenation, working in partnership with Houston Methodist. They have a patented RNA technology for delivery of telomerase to aged cells, and they have demonstrated reversal of aging in cells of progeria patients who suffer from accelerating aging. This is a very large market in the States, $16 billion for aesthetic procedures. There are more than 3 million procedures conducted per year. And so the prospect of personalized skin care is very promising. And so we have this sponsored research and expect proof of concept in the use of telomerase for molecular reversal of skin aging in the fourth quarter of this year as well. So relative to AVITA and our accomplishments here this past quarter, we realized 45% growth quarter over quarter in the sale of RECELL units. We received pediatric label expansion from the FDA. We submitted the new ease of use device to the FDA. And we've, again, achieved great penetration in the burn centers. Our soft tissue pivotal trial enrollment has accelerated quite significantly, and we're now 2/3 enrolled. And the FDA has approved the simplified vitiligo pivotal trial, which works to our advantage as well. In terms of key milestones that we're looking for in the near future, shareholder value creation events, we're expecting, again, Japanese PMDA approval in the fourth quarter of 21. Again, proof of concept with EB in Q4 of 21. Proof of concept on telomerase use on skin in a mouse model in the fourth quarter of 21. We expect the last patient to be enrolled in our vitiligo trial in the fourth quarter of 21. And then we expect approval in the vitiligo indication in the States in the second half of 23. We're expecting our outpatient C code for reimbursement to be approved by the end of the year and effective in the first half of 22. And we expect approval of that new ease of use device in the first half of 22 as well. And then we expect the last patient to be enrolled in our soft tissue trial in the second half of 22 and FDA approval in 24. So that's a quick snapshot on AVITA. We're both a medtech and a biotech company, and we believe the future is quite bright for the RECELL technology. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Michael. That was very insightful, and congratulations on the first FDA PME and that 85% penetration rate for US burn surgeons is absolutely fantastic. So thanks for the presentation, Michael. Michelle, welcome. Would love to hear more about Biotron and what you're doing there.
Well, thank you very much. So Biotron is a small molecule antiviral company. We're focused on developing small molecule drugs to target viruses with serious unmet medical need. We have a unique approach to treating viral infections. We have drugs which work as direct-acting antivirals, so they knock down the virus in the way that you expect antiviral drugs to work. But uniquely, because of the proteins that we're targeting in these viruses, we also have an immunomodulatory activity in our antiviral drugs. What that means is that they work to boost the body's immune system once the virus is knocked down to the right level, boost the body's immune system so the immune cells can come in and get a better level of response and wipe out the virus. We have a very experienced team at management and at board level. We're headquartered in Sydney, Australia, and we have quite a deep portfolio of clinical and preclinical programs. Today I'm really going to just focus on two of our programs, our HIV and of course our SARS-CoV-2 program. So our Biotron's key expertise is targeting particular type of protein found on viruses called viroporins. So viroporins are small hydrophobic proteins found on a broad range of viruses that are involved in a range of different things in the virus. Their main role is determining how a virus actually gets into a cell and hides from the immune system. It's sort of involved in dampening down the immune response that viruses need to do so they can establish themselves and cause disease. Our lead program is our HIV, where we've done a number of clinical trials, very successful. We've got some very exciting data out of those. And while that is of itself important for the HIV program, it shows proof of concept of targeting this particular class of virus proteins and validates our approach and potential for treating other serious diseases. During 2000 and early 2020, we extended our technology to target SARS-CoV-2. We've actually had a very long-standing interest in coronaviruses, dating back to the SARS-1 epidemic in the early 2000s. And I don't think I ever envisaged a day that coronaviruses would become topic du jour and something that there's so much expertise around compared to the early days of SARS-1. And in fact, Biotron scientists were the first to identify that the E protein of coronaviruses were druggable and a good target for therapeutic intervention. So our target that we're working on in SARS-CoV-2 is the SARS-CoV-2 E protein. Our approach has been to directly design compounds to work against this particular protein. It's a viroporin, the same as the target that we're going after in HIV, the VPU protein. It has multiple roles in the life cycle of coronaviruses or SARS-CoV-2. It's involved in the virus getting into the cells and getting back out of the cells. But more importantly, it's really key role in the developing the pathogenesis of the disease that arises from SARS-CoV-2, leading on to COVID. What E protein does, it triggers a whole lot of responses in a cell that leads to an inflammatory cascade. And this inflammatory cascade is what really causes the problems that we see with people with moderate to severe COVID. We get these changes cause edema, infiltration of cells, other problems that lead to respiratory distress and failure. What has been shown by others is that with other coronaviruses, if you delete the E protein, then coronaviruses they get attenuated infectivity, they're not as infectious, and they lose their pathogenicity. So our approach is that by targeting the E protein, then we will, with our small molecule drugs we're developing, we expect to be able to impact on not only on the virus levels, but also more importantly on the pathogenesis that you see in moderate or severe COVID. Within our program, I think it's important to state that vaccines, of course, are the central to control of this pandemic, but there is still a need for effective drugs that can be used in particular in at-risk populations. And by this, it's not just drugs that will work on the inflammation side that are not directly associated with the virus, but to develop drugs which work specifically on the virus and the virus-induced inflammation. So what we have done over the last 12 months, designed a library of over 100 compounds specifically designed to target SARS-CoV-2. We've been testing those in a range of different cell culture models in Australia and overseas. We now have a very nice lead series that has very good activity on these studies. And this slide shows very nice dose response curves of BitCov, one of our compounds, comparing that to remdesivir, which most people have heard of, is the Gilead antiviral drug that's approved and primarily in primary healthcare settings because it's used as an infusion. But just as a comparison, in terms of its antiviral effect, we see very similar responses in our cell culture models. The difference is, of course, that remdesivir is a potent antiviral, certainly in cell cultures, but it doesn't have any impact on the pathogenesis, the immunomodulatory side, which is the duality that our compounds have. What we now are progressing, what we're having progress at the moment is assessing a couple of these compounds in an animal model of SARS-CoV-2 in the US, and we expect to get that data shortly. And in parallel with that, assessing the immunomodulatory activity in various cellular-based models. And in parallel, of course, we're running preliminary preclinical safety studies so we can be sure that what we are developing is a compound that will be able to progress to human trials next year. To follow up with our HIV, of course, is Biotron's lead program, something we've been working on for a long time. The main aim of this is, we all know that there's certainly very potent, very good, very effective antiretroviral drugs out for patients, which successfully keep the virus levels down. The problem is that ART, or antiretroviral treatment, is incurative. Latent reservoirs still remain. The other really key, so you have to keep taking drugs for the lifetime of the patient. But the other key thing that is not as well recognized is that a large proportion of HIV positives, despite being on ART, do not achieve full immune reconstitution. Their immune system never goes back to normal levels. Their T cell counts don't come back to full levels. They also have significantly high proportion of chronic diseases associated with inflammation due to having the virus there constantly boosting the immune system and causing problems. So BIT225 is our lead antiviral drug. It combines this unique immunomodulatory activities along with direct-acting antiviral. How it functions is by targeting the VPU protein of HIV, which is responsible for hiding the virus from the immune system inside infected cells, so the cells can't be seen by the immune system. The 225 targets that and unmasks the cells, and that means that all of the downregulation of the immune functions and things that happen in the HIV positives, despite being on ART, can then be reversed, and you get the normal immune functioning being restored. The data for that showing that came from a completed successful phase 2 trial from a year or so ago, which has already been reported. The next steps for us is we're shortly to commence 2 new HIV trials in Australia and in Thailand to further explore these observations related to inflammation and immune function in both treatment-naive and treatment-experienced populations. The key thing is assessing particular biomarkers that are consistent with acceptable clinical and commercial applications. You can't actually have on your label that you're curing HIV. You need to actually have some other more tangible health benefit to patients linked to particular biomarkers, and that's specifically what these trials are set up to show. And we expect to commence the trials on receipt of ethics approval very shortly. The trials are scheduled to then complete enrolment late this year or early next year, and be completed by mid next year with results before the end of 2022. So in summary, Biotron's key focus remains its HIV. We have a clear clinical development program designed to demonstrate to regulators and pharmas how the drug can be used to improve healthcare outcomes in combination with ART. The promising SARS-CoV-2 drugs that are in preclinical development have the potential to impact on the immune dysfunction and pathogenesis that is seen in these patients, and the aim is to progress these as quickly as we can through the relevant models and into formal safety studies. Hepatitis B I haven't spoken about today, but it remains a very important early stage program for Biotron. Outlook for the next year, for the second half of this year's commencement of the trials, results from the SARS-CoV-2 in vitro and in the animal studies, some more data from our hepatitis B program in animal models, and we expect to complete enrolment in the HIV trials late this year, early next year, with completing the in-life component by mid next year. and also progressing in the first half of next year, we hope, the SARS-CoV-2 program into formal safety studies. Thank you.
Fantastic, Michelle. That was a great presentation, and it's really good to see that those trial results are actually validating your approach to HIV, and best of luck with the ethics approval. And Gavin, great to see you again. For those viewing today, Peak Asset Management actually backed Avecho and assisted Paul and the team with raising $5 million. So Gavin, we're key supporters, and we love what you're doing, and would love to get an overview of Avecho and how things are tracking.
Well, thank you. Just briefly, Avecho is a Melbourne-based biotech company with a novel formulation technology that we call TPM. Now, our background is pharmaceutical drug development for traditional non-cannabinoid medicines. But today I am going to focus on talking about how TPM can be used to overcome a range of problems associated with the formulation of cannabinoids, and how we're really using it to develop pharmaceutical cannabinoid products for registration. Now, this is just a very quick company snapshot slide. So I think when I took this yesterday, the market cap was around 35 million. But the reason I've really put this slide up there is to highlight the news flow related to the cannabinoid program. And so we only kicked the cannabinoid program off in April of last year. And as the product continued to advance and we got successful results, we saw renewed interest in the stock and a welcome improvement in the market price as a result, which culminated, I guess, in this spike before Christmas, which was to do with the announcement of a human clinical trial. Now, as Connor said, we took advantage of that in Feb, raised 5 million, and was significantly oversubscribed. And that capital raise was really put in place to fast track the continued development of the cannabinoid program, specifically around the CMC and the product development and manufacturing piece in the US with Catalent, as well as the conduct of human clinical trials in Australia and the work around a future TGA registration. So with that raise under the belt, we're well placed to really attack this development program as fast as we can. And so just to set the scene, I guess, because again, we're biotech, we don't come from the medicinal cannabis space, but really in the past decade, there's been a huge shift in the treatment of medicinal cannabis following the recognition of the therapeutic potential of cannabis and cannabis extracts. So many countries around the world have enacted legislation permitting the use of cannabis extracts for medicinal purposes, and some additional countries have also allowed consumer and recreational uses. But from our side, again, biotech side, because it's been illegal for so long, normal R&D that you would expect to have been conducted around formulation development and clinical trials simply hasn't been conducted. And so, from our perspective, moving forward, we think a range of more pharmaceutically acceptable dosage forms are going to be required. They're going to need clinical trial support and registration to really fulfill the needs of patients, physicians, and even consumers. However, I guess the cannabinoids themselves really have a range of technical issues that make them difficult to formulate. So the cannabinoids, which are the active components in cannabis extracts, are all oil-soluble molecules with low solubility in water. And like all other oil-soluble molecules, they have very poor oral absorption. So depending on the research that you're reading at the time, the cannabinoids only have 3 to 8% bioavailability. So whatever you eat, you're only absorbing 3 to 8% to have any beneficial effect, and you're excreting and metabolizing the remaining 90%. And so this presents real challenges for developing formulations that can deliver cannabinoids effectively. So there are a range there's a race at the moment with a range of companies around the world looking to increase cannabinoid bioavailability, because if you can do that, you can lead to greater therapeutic effect. You can potentially treat new indications that haven't been treatable before because of the high doses required. You can reduce the cost to patients by giving them a smaller dose. And from our end, you can really provide good technical and resulting commercial differentiation. And so this is really where we come in. So we've been using our TPM platform technology to increase the solubility of the cannabinoids. The image that you're looking at here, the vial on the right is essentially CBD in the presence of a formulation that contains mostly water. And as you can see, CBD being an oil-based molecule, completely insoluble, all precipitated out as a solid. But with the vial on the left, if you add a little bit of TPM, you can see that the TPM forms, well, you can't see, but the TPM forms nanoparticles. The nanoparticles encapsulate and dissolve the CBD, and you end up with a homogeneous formulation that's appropriate for administration. And when we see this kind of result here, we know that we've got a formulation that will potentially increase oral absorption as well as increase topical absorption as well. And so this result really sort of validated that we should be pursuing this in a formal pharmaceutical development program. And so what we did really in order to do that is we wanted to maximize a formulation and develop something that was more recognizable as a pharmaceutical dosage format. And so we started in Denmark. We did a range of formulation development, both in Melbourne and in Denmark, optimizing the ratio of our TPM to CBD and a few carrier oils. And we used in vitro gastric absorption models, but then took these formulations across into animals to really monitor what the absorption looked like. And that's essentially what the graph is that you can see here. This graph represents the total amount of CBD absorbed after a single oral dose. And everything is compared with this little red curve labeled the CBD control that you can see on the left. And that's essentially the total amount of CBD absorbed from the most commonly prescribed formulation in Australia. So it's just CBD dissolved in a carrier oil called MCT. Now, when you add a little bit of TPM to that formulation, which is the graph, the bar immediately to the right, you increase absorption by 4 times. When you add a little bit more TPM, you increase absorption by 12 times. And the line that you can see on the very right-hand side is a much more bespoke custom formulation. There's a lot of tricks in this to increase absorption, and the increase of CBD has gone up by 40 times. Now, we're not expecting a 40 times increase in people, but this is obviously a hugely exciting result for us. And we were talking to medicinal cannabis companies at the time that were very excited to see a 10 or a 20% increase in CBD bioavailability. So this 40 times was a great result, and this formulation labeled number 3 here is what we then took forward towards clinical development. And so this is really what we've been building over the last year, a pharmaceutical CBD soft gel product. We took the formulation from Denmark, we engaged Catalent in the US to turn it into a soft gel capsule. It's now a 75 milligram CBD capsule, and it's 75 milligrams specifically to fit in with the TGA's descheduling of CBD. So December last year, the TGA announced that moving forward, CBD products could be prescribed as over-the-counter medicines. So you wouldn't have to go to a doctor or a GP. You could just walk straight into the chemist. Obviously, the rub is that it has to be approved, has to show safety and efficacy with clinical trials, and it has to have a maximal daily dose of 150 milligrams. So our 75 milligram capsule, it fits within the 150 milligram framework. So you could take 2 capsules at once for certain indications, like maybe sleep, or take twice a day for indications that need round-the-clock dosing. Now, this capsule is about to go into phase 1 clinical trials in the next couple of weeks, where we're going to see for the first time in people whether we have what this increased absorption profile looks like, and then this will go into phase 3 pivotal studies in Australia, initially starting with a sleep-focused indication for over-the-counter approval. Now, the field formulation itself is already on an ongoing clinical trial in Australia, one of these larger observational trials to get increase the safety data. And whilst we're obviously running towards pharmaceutical registration, we're looking at the product as a licensing opportunity for other territories, other markets, and other indications. And so just a bit more information about the phase 1 PK study. So it's a single dose crossover, 2 doses, the 75 versus the 150 in healthy volunteers. Dosing begins first week of October for the first crossover, and the second crossover is the second week of October. So it'll all be finished by mid-October. Plasma samples will be analysed in Canada, actually, for CBD concentration as well as exposure to the novel excipient. And then high-level data will be available for announcing, we're hoping, in December. And so whilst that's very exciting, and we've got a range of potential partners waiting to see what that PK result looks like, we're building the phase 3 program in Australia with a few sleep experts, and also kicking off all the regulatory work that will be required to get the product approved. Now, just quickly, I guess, on the opportunity with the product, it's particularly unique for us. I mean, in biotech, we're very used to developing a drug and taking it to a phase in clinical development where it would be licensed for a specific indication. But CBD is ubiquitous and it's being prescribed for everything. And so whilst we keep our eye on the ball and do the pharmaceutical clinical development, we know that all the work that we do there adds value to all the other markets. And so potentially in Australia, we can sell the product immediately under SASB or license it to someone to sell immediately. We can be licensing it to other Australian companies for other indications beyond the sleep one that we're currently approaching. And then in the rest of the world, we're already talking to other companies about licensing the soft gel product for specific geographies, licensing it for specific sectors, so not just medicinal or pharmaceutical, but also the consumer space, and also licensing by indication. So, this is currently being prescribed for sleep, anxiety, pain, mental health conditions. And so all of these are indications that you can potentially carve off and license the product for. And when you look at the size of the market, so the medicinal cannabis piece alone was nearly 8 billion last year and is expected to be 30 to 50 billion by 2027, with very little in the way of formulation differentiation. It seems a very attractive proposition. And when you factor in that we can put this product into the consumer space as well, the global cannabis market is already 20 billion and expected to be 90 billion by 2026. So there's a lot of avenues for us to get value from this one product. And just quickly, last slide on the news flow. This is really, there's going to be a lot of news over the cannabinoid program over the coming year, but just really till the end of 2021, we'll obviously have completion and results around our phase 1 PK study, where we aim to produce some phase 3 program updates as well around what the program moving forward looks like and timeframes associated there. We've got another clinical program with some collaborators that we'll announce shortly. That's not on our main path, but again, we're comfortable now to get our formulations and our products into other people's hands to really start building value from what it can do. And we're also expecting to announce some partnering and licensing opportunities around the product in the next few months. So a lot of news flow, hopefully, for the investors to get some real value out of their investment. So again, thank you for your time.
Great. No, thanks very much for that, Paul. I mean, it's great to see regulatory bodies around the world actually, showing recognition for CBD and the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes. And I think key for you guys is, that 40% increase in bioavailability will be a key unique selling proposition comparatively with all the other products that'll be coming onto market. So very, very keen to keep an eye on the business and how the trials go. So thanks for the presentation. And lastly, we have Gary from Pharmaxis. Fantastic to have you here, Gary, today, and thanks for taking the time. Would love to be brought up to speed with what's happening over there.
Thanks very much, Connor. Thanks for the invitation. So I'll just start with just a quick overview of the company. Pharmaxis is a clinical stage drug development company. We produce small molecule drugs. We have an in-house drug development team. So we have researched and developed drugs ourselves that are used in diseases which are driven by fibrosis, and we've recently moved into cancer. We've got two assets, two drugs, which are currently in trials, which will deliver efficacy and safety results by the end of next year. And we have the cash in the bank, plus a commercial stage business generating cash flow to get us past those points. We have if you look at our capital structure, at the end of June, we had 21 million in the bank. Going forward, we expect to see our commercial business, which we have a manufacturing plant here in Sydney, to generate significant EBITDA as we go forward. That business has been in a turnaround situation. So if we will go back to FY20, that business lost 4 million during that year. That product had an FDA approval in October of last year, and we've now moved that business into a cash flow positive one. We expect to generate about $10 million worth of EBITDA over the next 5 years in a 5-year period. So by FY26, that's the sort of money we should be returning in the bank. From an enterprise value, Pharmaxis has increased significantly since the end of FY21. We're now sitting at around about 60 million in terms of market cap and enterprise value of around about 40. Our key supporters in terms of major shareholders are BVF. BVF Partners are a US West Coast investor. They specialize in healthcare. They've been with us since 2015. They really like the team and the science, and that's why they've stayed with us and supported us through the last capital raise. The last capital raise in April, we brought on board Cars Peak. Cars Peak are, again, specialist healthcare institution, which it like to invest in undiscovered or underappreciated assets. And they came in to Pharmaxis at that point, and we've certainly done well since then. And DNA Income is a UK-based fund. Our team at Pharmaxis, my background is in big pharma. So I was with Novartis, ran their Asia-Pacific region and then Australia until joining Pharmaxis, where I've been the CEO since 2013. I'm joined on the management team by Wolfgang Jerolomek and Dieter Hamprecht, two people from drug development groups in large pharma companies, Wolfgang from GSK and Dieter from Boehringer Ingelheim, both with a wealth of experience. And it's really their passion and their experience that's allowed us to generate more than 5 drugs in the last 5 years to get through from basic research through into the clinic, which is a great level of productivity. On the board, we're joined by Kathleen Metters. Kathleen was the head of basic research at Global Merck for 4 years and also ran a successful biotech in the US before exiting a few years ago. And Neil Graham was a senior clinical person in immunology at Regeneron. So this slide just shows the pipeline that we have within Pharmaxis. It's one that I think can generate significant value for shareholders over the next 2 years. 2 main assets, as I mentioned up front. One of them, 5505, is an anti-fibrotic. It's taken orally twice a day. The first indication we put it in is myelofibrosis. Myelofibrosis is a rare kind of bone cancer. We have a dose escalating study, so testing an escalating dose to see the impact on patients over a 1-month period, which is shortly coming to a conclusion. And that red diamond shape on the chart there just shows that we're about to see some results from that first level of that study. If that's successful, then we will go on into a phase 2 study, which is a 6-month study, testing that drug in patients with this kind of bone cancer. 6302, the next row down, is a drug which is topical. It's applied to the skin, and it's to treat scarring of the skin. That's just finished a phase 1 study, so in healthy volunteers, where we've demonstrated the drug is both safe and inhibits the enzymes which are prevalent in scarring. And we're about to start studies in established scars and burns, which will again report out by the end of next year. So here we have 2 drugs, one in oncology, a cancer indication, the other one in a scarring indication. Both of them in studies which were testing both the safety and efficacy of those drugs. Both of them will report by the end of next year in a company which has the cash to get to that point. So just looking at those 2 indications in a little bit more detail. Myelofibrosis, this kind of bone cancer. This is a cancer of the bone marrow. So the bone marrow becomes fibrotic or gets scarred. The bone marrow is the body's engine for producing red cells, white cells, and platelets. So the patients who get myelofibrosis become anemic, their spleens enlarge, and they get a lot of other symptoms such as bone pain, fever, and night sweats. The current standard of care in myelofibrosis are JAK inhibitors. JAK inhibitors have been used for a number of years now. They produce largely symptomatic impact on the myelofibrosis. But they nevertheless have sales exceeding $1 billion. So there's a huge market opportunity for here. And we believe that 5505 is a disease-modifying drug. In myelofibrosis, the study, we have primary endpoints in the study are safety, but secondary ones include fibrosis. So we're taking bone biopsies to look at the fibrosis. We're looking at the hematology, so the red cells and white cell count, and looking at symptom scores as well. That study due to recruit and finish its results by the end of next year. The other study is in scarring. We're working with Fiona Wood's group in Perth. In this disease, we're inhibiting the enzymes which cause the scarring. particularly looking at hypertrophic and keloid scarring. This is an area which has more than 4 billion in sales worldwide trying to correct keloid scarring, and there are no pharmacological treatments for dealing with scarring. By stopping the cross-linking of the collagen fibers in the scars, we believe we can melt away the scars that appear on patients and thereby improve both their appearance and also their function as well. As I mentioned before, we're just about to start a 3-month study in patients with established scars with Fiona Wood's group in Perth, and that will then go on to a study in patients with burns as well. This is not a wound healing drug. This is one which looks at reversing the scarring process and stopping the build-up after the wound healing has taken place of scars which cause both cosmetic and functional problems. So just wrapping up that news flow, I mentioned before that the market value of Pharmaxis has increased quite substantially since the end of FY21, and that's been driven by a lot of news flow as the company has, as I mentioned before, got an FDA approval for its drug in the US at the end of last year, a drug which is now producing commercial returns. We've sold off the rights to a number of territories where we were distributing that same drug and again increased the level of non-dilutive cash coming into the company. But looking forward, what we can see immediately in the next half of 2021 is first of all a report on finishing that dose escalation study in myelofibrosis. We're expecting to report on that imminently. And that will give us the permission to go on and go into the 6th-month study in bone cancer, which we expect to produce efficacy results by the end of next year. As well as that study, we'll also be starting the study of the topical drug 6302 in first established scars and then patients with burns, and looking at other publications that are coming through showing further preclinical work that the company is doing in other cancers. Looking forward to next year, it'll be all about those 2 studies. And typically this is what drives value in biotech companies, is the production of efficacy data from phase 2 studies. So Pharmaxis is at a critical point of its development and one where we're really poised for a significant amount of growth if we can demonstrate efficacy from these 2 drugs which we've put into the clinic. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Gary. That was a fantastic presentation, and I love the way how you've turned around the business from a $4 million loss and now producing positive cash flow. And with those 2 studies around the corner, I think there's some very exciting things happening at Pharmaxis. So really appreciate your presentation. So yeah, now we have a number of questions that have been submitted by the audience. So Paul, I might just start with you. We have CBD oils, one of the more popular forms of CBD delivery systems. How does a gel capsule improve on the effectiveness of these treatments?
Well, the CBD oils that are currently being prescribed are prescribed because the medicinal cannabis companies could get them pretty easily to market. So moving forward, no one wants to actually drink an oil. And so moving forwards, when you're looking at pharmaceutical registration, people are used to capsules and tablets and fixed unit dosing. And this is something as well that physicians want. They want to be able to prescribe something with a drug label at a discrete unit dose. So as far as the efficacy piece as well, there won't be too much difference. So our oil works particularly well just as an oil. But as far as patient compliance and, fixed unit dosing, that's where we see the real benefit to be.
Fantastic. And the second question the audience had for you, Paul, was, would CBD treatments for domestic animals be a potential future focus for Avecho's animal health products, or is the focus solely just on these human trials and sort of how big are these markets?
Yeah, the pet space for CBD is huge. It's getting embarrassingly big. And so, we're small biotech, so we don't have the bandwidth to develop all the applications that the formulation could be used for itself, but definitely we're in early discussions now because the exact same formulation that we've developed is directly applicable to pet applications. So we're in early discussions now with some companies that are under the in development of CBD for pets.
Great, yeah, that's great to see that they're applicable for the pet market as well, as that's growing exponentially. Michael, a question for you. So What is the potential addressable market in Japan, and is AVITA looking to access any other markets?
Good questions. So we view the addressable market in Japan for us at approximately $60 million. The way we get at that is we look at the 3 indications that we're seeking approval for through Cosmotech. Burns, which we think is highly likely in the first quarter of this next calendar year. The vitiligo market and the soft tissue market. And rough rule of thumb, the Japanese market is generally considered to be about 10% the size of the US market. And then with our relationship with Cosmotech, it's roughly a 50-50 split. They do all the sales and marketing, and we do the production. So again, about $60 million. And relative to other markets, yeah, very much so. We currently have a CE mark in Europe. We're TGA approved in Australia. However, the burn market is relatively small in those markets, and the reimbursement, particularly in Europe, is pretty fragmented. So our plans are, once we obtain approval for vitiligo in soft tissue in the US, we think there'll be enough economies of scale to support the cost of sales and marketing and provide sufficient return for our investors. So at that point, we'll enter back into Australia and Europe in a more meaningful way. Right now, we're not promoting, we just actively fill orders, but we'll have a much more robust effort in the future.
Fantastic. And is AVITA engaged in R&D to update its RECELL system, or is the company focused on moving into new indications as well?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have a very robust development program for both product and indications. So we're investing heavily in both areas. So as I mentioned briefly in the presentation, we have the ongoing clinical trials in vitiligo and soft tissue, the research proof of concepts in cell and gene therapy, and then if you remember the one slide where there's just so many additional indications that we plan to get to, but we've prioritized burns and these other indications. So we're going at all of that robustly. So if you look on our income statement, the R&D line is quite substantial because we're investing in the future, and we think that's best for our investors.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you. And Michelle, coming back to you. So a question, considering the rate at which SARS can mutate, are the company's compounds actually positioned to be resistant against mutations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's actually quite an important one with viral drugs in general, is the issue of resistance. We're fortunate in that the protein that we target in viruses, these viroporins, are not overly susceptible to mutation. They're not like some of the proteins that are part of the key machinery of the replication, which are the sort of first thing that viruses replicate and become mutate against the new drugs. Our viroporin targets are not like that, and because they're involved across the broad range of different things within the cells, they're not as susceptible. Certainly, there's not as much pressure to mutate. What we've found from our HIV program is that we don't generate resistance readily. Like, you need to develop some sort of resistance to be an antiviral by definition, but there's certainly not the same pressure. And of course, it's something that we test our compounds as we're going through against any new isolates that come up. I think it's also important to note that nobody really expects that there'll be like one wonder drug that will be used. It's always likely, certainly once we get through this current situation with the pandemic and into a more normal situation with this coronavirus is going to be around for a while, that there be a couple of different modes of action drugs that will be used in combination, as we do for HIV and other things.
Fantastic, Michelle. And what are some of the challenges conducting clinical trials overseas? And is there anything in particular that investors should look out for?
Yeah. Look, we've run probably half a dozen trials now overseas in Thailand. This current one is working once again with sites that we know very well, with very experienced CROs on the ground that we know well. Certainly in this day and age, so much stuff is done online or electronic databases, whatever. So we've got very good people we work with in the US on the ground there, as well as in Australia. So there's, from an operational perspective, there's limited challenges and issues around that. It's pretty much business as usual. The key thing and during the current pandemic is having anybody doing trials on any indication needs to have a very robust COVID plan, how they're going to manage patients going in, data along the way, and the impact that might have on recruitment, the data, and the other things. And if you have that, Thailand has had, of course, the outbreak has been quite severe this year, but the numbers are going down with COVID, which is a very positive thing. I think the main thing for us is for investors to watch out for is when we start the trial, and then when we finish recruitment, we don't expect this to impact on recruitment. Unfortunately, this is HIV positives still get diagnosed. This is trials in newly diagnosed patients starting ART with our drug added in for 6 months. The reality is they'll still be presenting at the hospitals and Thai Red Cross that we work with.
Great. Thanks for that, Michelle. And Gary, moving on to yourself with Pharmaxis, we have a question here. What are some of the other treatment options for myelofibrosis? And could IPXS-5505 be used as a combination therapy with any of these treatments?
Yeah, the current standard of care is a group of compounds called JAK inhibitors. So they're used, and their primary effect is to reduce the spleen size. So the spleens enlarge in these patients because their bone marrow gives up producing red cells, and the spleen tries to take over it, so it becomes bigger. So the JAK inhibitors do reduce spleen size, but they also have quite a nasty side effect profile as well. So they can cause reductions in red cells and white cells as well as reducing the symptoms. So we're really looking for a drug here which can modify the course of the disease. These patients live for about 5 years. If we can change the process of the fibrosis in the bone marrow, then we can restore the red cells and white cells back to their normal levels and reduce that scarring which takes place there. So combinations of our drug on top of the JAK inhibitors does look like an effective way to go under the regulators' guidance, the people like the FDA. So we're working the current trial under an IND approval from the FDA. The first step is to show efficacy and safety of our drug as a monotherapy on its own. The step after that will be to show it in combination, and that's certainly where the commercial opportunity is.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gary. And the second question, why do you think Pharmaxis is valued less than some of your peers developing myelofibrosis treatments? And when do you sort of expect, the catalysts, and will that change?
Well, I think, I mentioned the unmet need here, and companies which have phase 2 data, so the kind of position that we'll be in at the end of next year. If you demonstrate positive data in myelofibrosis, then these companies have attracted valuations in $500 million to over $1 billion on NASDAQ. The difference is just data. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that Pharmaxis is at a critical point of its development. I think we are, from a valuation point of view, we've got all the steps in place now to make a big leap forward. We have the cash in bank to complete the studies that we've started out on. We've got support from the regulators, from key opinion leaders to use our drug in these studies, and now we need to execute on the studies that we've started. Michelle mentioned that there was, the need to have a COVID-safe plan for your studies. Our myelofibrosis study has got sites in 4 different countries: Taiwan, Korea, Australia, and the US, just to cover that point, to make sure that we can recruit the patients we need in the time frame we have, so that we can deliver on the study during the second half of next year.
Great. Well, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Michael and Gary. I think to wrap things up, You guys you're developing some amazing treatments. You're doing studies, clinical trials. It looks like you're very well positioned to take on in your respective fields. So just wanted to say a big thank you for joining the webinar today, and see you all soon in person. Thanks everyone for tuning in to Peak Asset Management's and Monsoon's Emerging Biotech Webinar. Thanks all for listening. We had 4 emerging companies that are all showing very promising signs with studies in clinical trials. So keep an eye on them. Thank you.